Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be unraveling the life of Saint Radbod, Bishop of Utrecht.
Oh, Saint Radbod.
Yeah, and we've got an incredible source for this one, a biography written by someone who actually knew him.
Wow.
Yeah, offering us a real personal glimpse into his world. So, get ready. We're about to uncover some fascinating details about a man. Not only was he a scholar and a bishop, but he was also rumored to have this miraculous ability to turn water into wine and to see the future.
It's amazing that we have such a personal account of Radbod's life.
Yeah.
It really helps us understand him, not just as like a historical figure,
Yeah.
as a real complex person.
Yeah, and when I was reading this biography, one thing that really struck me was Radbod's dedication to learning. He wasn't just your typical student. This guy studied at the courts of Kings Charles the Bald and Louis, rubbing shoulders with future bishops.
I mean, that's really saying something about the importance of intellectual pursuits back then. Just imagine studying alongside Stephen, later Bishop of Tongeren, and Mancio, who became the Bishop of Chalon. The biography even calls it a pious rivalry, which I think really pushed them all to excel.
I wonder what their study sessions were like. From what I gathered, it seems like Radbod wasn't just absorbing knowledge, he was also creating it.
Oh, absolutely.
He wrote hymns and poems, even a chronicle.
That's pretty impressive.
It's quite the resume for a future bishop.
Well, Trithemius, a later scholar, listed all of Radbod's works,
Yeah.
including a collection of praises that were dedicated to different saints. So it's pretty clear. Radbod, he was a prolific writer and a deep thinker.
Yeah.
His scholarship, it wasn't just a phase, it was a lifelong passion.
And yet this scholar, this intellectual powerhouse, almost didn't become a bishop. Can you believe that?
Really?
In 899, when he was appointed Bishop of Utrecht, he was actually hesitant to accept.
I think that says a lot about his humility and his deep commitment to that simple monastic life. He wasn't out there seeking power or prestige.
Yeah, and in fact, he adopted that monastic habit and practiced this really austere lifestyle as bishop.
What a contrast.
Right.
He could have, enjoyed all the perks that came with being a bishop, but he chose a life of simplicity.
Yeah, abstaining from meat, engaging in prolonged fasts.
It's a recurring theme throughout his life, this dedication to a humble lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think it challenges our modern ideas of what leadership really means.
Absolutely.
It suggests that true authority doesn't need those outward displays of power, but it comes from an inner strength and a commitment to, those higher ideals.
But it's not like he completely hid his piety away. There's that incredible story of the layman, who I guess was skeptical of Radbod's rumored abstinence and decided to test him. He secretly took a drink from Radbod's cup, thinking it would be wine, but it was just water, until of course it miraculously transformed into wine right in front of him.
That story really captures the imagination, doesn't it? Speaks to this belief in Radbod's sanctity, that he was favored by God. But I also think it kind of highlights this tension between his desire for a humble life and the undeniable signs of his piety.
It makes you wonder how he reconciled those two sides of himself. On one hand, he's this humble monk dedicated to simplicity, and on the other hand, he's performing miracles.
Maybe it's a reminder that even the most devout individuals are still human, They grapple with contradictions and complexity.
Absolutely. And speaking of complexities, Radbod's life wasn't all quiet contemplation and miraculous wine. He lived through some pretty tough times, with Viking raids happening all across Europe,
Oh, yeah.
causing chaos.
Absolutely. And Radbod showed such resilience and leadership in the face of those threats. When Utrecht was ravaged by Vikings, he didn't just give up. He moved everything to Deventer and continued to guide his people through those difficult times.
So from scholar to bishop, and now a leader facing a crisis, it makes me wonder if his earlier experiences, at the royal courts, navigating the politics of the time, maybe that prepared him for this kind of leadership challenge.
That's an interesting connection.
Yeah.
It's possible that his time at court gave him the skills and the insights to navigate those complexities of leading during times of turmoil. He wasn't just a spiritual leader, he was also a practical one.
Yeah, and he definitely cared for the people he served. The biography talks about how he would personally wash the feet of the poor. He would provide them with food and clothing, visit the sick.
And this wasn't just for show, it was a genuine expression of his compassion and his commitment to actually living out the gospel. He saw himself as a servant to his community, especially the most vulnerable people.
His actions seem to reflect a very specific idea of what a bishop should be. He wasn't interested in amassing wealth or power. He was totally focused on the well-being of his people and the mission of the church.
And this brings us to another fascinating part of Radbod's life, his prophetic abilities. It seems he was known for making predictions that actually came true, further solidifying his reputation as a holy man.
The biography mentions a few specific prophecies, like the one about a young man named Baldric, who would eventually succeed Radbod as bishop.
Right, and he even predicted that Baldric would restore the church and rebuild Utrecht.
Wow.
It's fascinating how those prophecies shaped not just Radbod's life, but also the lives of the people around him. It raises questions about the power of belief and the impact our words and our visions can have on the future.
And speaking of predictions, Radbod also foresaw his own death, announcing during Mass that he would die in 3 years and 6 months.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like for the people there.
I know.
It speaks to his unwavering faith and his acceptance of death. He didn't fear it. He saw it as a transition to a higher realm.
But before we get to that final chapter, there's one more story that I found particularly captivating. It's about a vision he had while he was seriously ill.
Ah, yes, the vision of the Virgin Mary, accompanied by Saints Thecla and Agnes. That's a classic in hagiographies. It showcases divine favor and reinforces that saintly image.
But it's not just the imagery. The room was bathed in light. The Virgin Mary, she offered him words of comfort, and then, boom, his illness just vanished.
It's like something out of a movie. Those visions often served a dual purpose. On a practical level, they could inspire hope and encourage devotion. But they could also symbolize those internal struggles or those spiritual transformations in the life of the saint.
Okay, so what can we take away from all of this so far? We've seen Radbod as a scholar, a bishop, a leader during crisis, a compassionate servant, and a man touched by the divine. It's a lot.
It really is, and we've only just scratched the surface. It's amazing how Radbod's story still resonates with us centuries later. He wasn't perfect, but he lived with such intention, striving to embody his values in a complex and often turbulent world. It's interesting how those stories of miracles and prophecies, they're all intertwined with Radbod's very human struggles. Imagine trying to lead a community facing those Viking raids and trying to live up to these incredible expectations all at the same time.
Yeah, it must have been so challenging for him. And yet, he seems to have navigated those challenges with such grace and determination. He never strayed from his commitment to that simple monastic life, even as a bishop.
It really shows his character, doesn't it? It would have been so easy for him to just embrace the power and wealth that came with being a bishop, but he chose a different path.
Yeah, it makes me think about our own relationship with, material things and status. It's easy to get caught up in always wanting more, but Radbod's example suggests that maybe true fulfillment comes from letting go of those worldly attachments.
I think so. Maybe for him, that simple life was a way of staying grounded, reminding himself that his true purpose was to serve something bigger than himself.
That's a powerful message, especially in our culture today.
Absolutely. And speaking of his vision of leadership, let's go back to that prophecy about Baldric for a second. It wasn't just a prediction, it was almost like a blueprint for the kind of leader Radbod wanted Baldric to be.
Right. He said that Baldric would restore the church and rebuild Utrecht. It's like he was setting a challenge for his successor, pushing him to reach for something more.
What's really interesting is that Baldric actually took those words to heart. He really embraced that vision that Radbod laid out. And when he did become bishop, he worked hard to fulfill that prophecy.
It makes me wonder, what impact did those words have on Baldric, Did he feel pressure to live up to those expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. Just imagine you're told as a young man that you have a specific destiny, a legacy to live up to. That could really be a driving force, a source of inspiration, but also pressure, right?
It's a great example of how powerful words can be. They can shape not just our own lives, but also the lives of those around us.
And Radbod's words, even his prophecies, were really about creating a better future. He saw potential in Baldric, this potential to bring about change and restore what was lost. It's a message of hope, this belief in future generations to make a difference. It feels pretty relevant today, I think.
Definitely. It makes me think about the legacy we're creating, too. Are we inspiring others? Are we leaving a positive impact on the world?
Those are good questions.
Right.
And it brings us back to the historical context of Radbod's life. He wasn't just dealing with these abstract theological ideas. He was facing a real threat with the Viking raids.
Yeah, it wasn't just history for him. It was an everyday danger and a source of fear for his whole community.
Exactly. The biography even talks about how Utrecht was attacked, and Radbod was forced to relocate to Deventer for a while.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like. It must have taken such strength and resilience to lead people through that kind of turmoil.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even in the middle of all that chaos, he never forgot his mission. He kept serving his people, offering comfort and guidance.
It's pretty inspiring, right? Even when faced with those kinds of challenges, we can choose to focus on our values and our commitment to something bigger than ourselves.
It's like a captain steering a ship through a storm. He can't control the wind and the waves, but he can keep his hand on the wheel and guide the ship to safety.
And Radbod definitely seems to have had that kind of inner strength, a clear sense of direction that helped him get through those tough times.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we can cultivate a sense of peace and purpose, even when things are chaotic around us.
And speaking of that, there's one more detail from the biography that I found really insightful. Remember how strongly he believed that bishops should focus on spiritual matters and stay out of those secular affairs?
Oh yeah, it was a huge thing for him. He stuck to that belief, even when there was pressure to get involved in politics.
Well, the biography actually gives us a glimpse into why he felt so strongly about that. It wasn't just about avoiding politics, it was about prioritizing something deeper.
Absolutely. He believed that bishops needed to be spiritually prepared. They needed to pray for the king and the people's safety, their peace and stability. Their main focus should be on prayer and helping people find God, not those worldly affairs.
That's a really powerful idea. It suggests that for him, true leadership was about channeling divine grace, not earthly power.
And it kind of challenges our modern assumptions about what makes a good leader. It suggests that inner transformation, focusing on spiritual development, is just as important as outward action.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Was that focus on his inner life the key to his resilience, his ability to lead during those difficult times?
It's a fascinating question. Maybe his faith gave him strength and clarity, something to hold on to even when things were tough.
It's definitely something to think about as we keep exploring his life and legacy. It's amazing how Radbod balanced these seemingly contradictory parts of his life. He was a scholar, totally immersed in these intellectual pursuits, but also a man of action who led his community through some real crises.
I think he embodies that idea of ora et labora, prayer and work, that was so central to the Benedictine tradition. He was both contemplative and active, recognizing both were essential for a fulfilling life.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about work and prayer, right? He also managed to be both this dedicated monk and a bishop with all these demands and responsibilities.
And he didn't see those two things as being in conflict at all. I actually think his simple lifestyle, it made him a more effective bishop.
Yeah.
It showed his people that he wasn't in it for power or wealth. He genuinely wanted to serve God and them.
I think you're right. It makes you wonder if that authenticity was part of what made him such a strong leader. He wasn't putting on an act or anything, he was just being himself.
Totally. That connection between what you say and what you do, it's powerful. It makes people trust you, even if they don't agree with everything you believe.
Absolutely. And it's something that's important no matter the time period or situation, right? Whether you're a CEO, a teacher, or a parent. Living your values authentically is one of the most powerful things you can do.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And Radbod definitely walked the walk. He didn't just talk about humility and service, he lived them.
And that brings us back to his ability to navigate the complexities of his time. He was a diplomat, securing land for the church, a strategic thinker moving to Deventer when Utrecht was threatened, and he was so compassionate, caring for the poor and sick.
He really had a mix of pragmatism and idealism, didn't he? He understood the realities of power and politics, but he never let go of his values.
What was his secret? How did he stay grounded and focused in the middle of all the chaos and uncertainty of his time?
Maybe it was his faith. Maybe it was his simple life, without distractions. Or maybe it was just who he was, this deep resilience that helped him through hard times.
Whatever it was, Radbod's life offers a ton of insights into leadership, faith, and just what it means to be human.
It reminds us that even when life is challenging, we can still live with purpose, hold on to our values, and try to make the world a better place.
This has been an amazing journey learning about this incredible person. As we wrap up our deep dive, I'm just in awe of what Radbod accomplished.
Yeah, and maybe, most importantly, we're left with a question. How can we be more like Radbod? How can we balance our intellectual interests with a commitment to service? How do we make sure our words and actions match up with our values?
Those are great questions to consider as we continue on our own paths. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep diving deep.